And so we've been working on Maryland's Eastern Shore. We are one of 2 schools of architecture and planning in the state of Maryland, and we have adopted Maryland's Eastern Shore as one of our laboratories, and we are working with numerous partners. We have the mayor from the city of Cambridge, who we've been working with on numerous endeavors over there as well. Well, I'm going to highlight Dr. Henry Louis Gates and one of his quotes that I typically borrow from, which is, "Wherever you go in history of America, there have been black people making contributions, but their contributions have been obscured, and their contributions have been lost, and their contributions have been buried." This reflects very much the hallowed grounds in this site of African American memories as it relates to the Hill community. It's not anything that anyone that's working with us would say we've discovered. It is just a history and a culture that's been lost. It's one that's been buried, and our archaeologists are unearthing that. It's one that's been obscured, and the elevation of the public's awareness and appreciation is helping to elevate that as well. And so I borrow that a lot for our African American History Month celebrations, because this is work that we must work together to increase the public's awareness and appreciation for. A colleague from the Kinsey collection often quotes that there's the history that made America, and there's the history that America made up. And when I think about what we're coming to learn about the Hill community, it really reflects the history that made America. We're not here to talk about the history that America made up. We're here to talk about the history that made America. And it's a black history. It's an American history. Our friends from the Latino population are here. Our friends from the white community are here. Our Methodist friends, our Quaker friends, our Baptist friends. It is an American story. As we excavate the significance of the Hill community, we learn of how rich the integrated tapestry is of the Hill community, and that is very, very important to its fabric. I'm reminded of when I first began speaking about the Hill in 2010. Easton in that year was celebrating its 300th anniversary. Founded in 1710, and I came in 2010, and it was celebrating 300 years. And one of the opening statements I made was, you cannot tell the 300-year history of the town of Easton without talking about the role of the African American. And I must admit, at that time, I wasn't too sure that the Hill community would have such the significance that it did, but certainly we knew that African Americans had contributed to the town's fabric. It had been 300 years, and we recognize and we celebrate that rich history. So as I had mentioned, we came here originally to document these churches. We are still working with the churches. Both churches are being restored. The celebration this year is being held at the historic Bethel AME Church, because 200 years ago, the African Methodist Episcopal Church was founded by the founder, Bishop Richard Allen, who was intimately aware of the Hill community and this Bethel AME Church. In fact, their first session of that conference, and this is what Barbara Paik and I have been talking about on the tour in terms of the national significance, was held in Baltimore, Maryland in 1817. And in that year, they had this place, the Hill community, on their mind. In the meeting records, they talk about what's called these parts of Maryland, and they decide to send a Reverend Shadrach Bassett to what they call these parts of Maryland, and he preached to a crowd out at South and Hanson, standing on the back of an ox cart, and he said to them, "On this rock I build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." And they said he pointed in 2 different directions. And what we know today is that there are 2 churches in these 2 different directions. We don't know what directions he pointed in, but we have Asbury and we have a Bethel church. And that's coming out of that this bicentennial celebration that we celebrate. And this has become the oldest African-American independent congregation on Maryland's Eastern Shore, representing the 9 counties of the Eastern Shore. What is unique about this church and this community, as well as it relates to myself and my heritage, is that the 6th pastor of this church was my 8th great uncle, Reverend Robert Francis Wayman, who was the brother to Bishop Alexander Walker Wayman, who was my 7th great. And so my roots are tied to this place. And as the team has shared with me, I've learned more and more about how intertwined my family's history is with this rich community known as the Hill. So we've been working on the Hill Community Project since 2010, and it has many parts to this project. One area is the historiography. Another area is the land records that are being used, the oral history. Because as the African proverb says, when an elder dies, it's as if the library burns to the ground. And so we're grateful that one of the oldest descendants, Miss Rosalie Gale, who was born 94 years ago in her home, is one who has worked with us to capture the oral history. The genealogy is important, and we have been working with various families with the genealogy. The archaeology is important, and both Stephen and Tracy are here from College Park with the archaeology, and they have artifacts that are here that have been retrieved from the community. And then the preservation of this rich community is important, because the buildings and the built environment that we've taken a tour around speak to the era and the period of significance. And so I borrowed from Dr. Booker T. Washington, who was the principal of the then Tuskegee Institute and now Tuskegee University, who talked about lifting the veil of ignorance. And we've merely said that we've lifted a veil of ignorance over these 6 areas. The historiography was here, the land records were here, the oral history is here, the archaeology is here, and we've just been a team who has lifted the veil off of such an amazing history and culture and the naming, and we're excited about that. The same families that have been living here since 1790, when the first U.S. Census was conducted, are still here in this community. There are families that can trace their genealogy back more than 13 generations. There's the archaeology from more than 4 sites that have been retrieved. There's the land records and the families from those who bought the original plot. In fact, Yvonne Freeman, who is over to my left, if she would stand, is a detective with the town of Easton's police department. And it was her ancestor who is the founding father of the free black community here on the Hill. James Freeman bought lot 31 right across the street from this church in 1788 as a free black man. And he and his wife with their 8 children lived on that lot. And Yvonne Freeman is a descendant still here, working for the town. And so it speaks to that long history of these families that are in this community. And it's more than a history project. We have an active agenda with the town of Easton and with the county and many others where we are working to revitalize the community. We have a Housing on the Hill project, and we have private investors who are also a part of that work. And we look forward to special announcements that will be forthcoming about that work. We have some individuals from the community who we call notable, such as Grace Brooks, who I'm reminded of every time I look at Cindy Smith, who tells me that she just emerged out of some land records that she had in her home. But Grace Brooks was this amazing woman, as I shared with people on the tour. She is an amazing Grace. She was born in 1740. And in 1788, she purchases her freedom and her family, and she moves here to the Hill community. And she's one who was of industry and economy. She had an obituary, which was just an impressive read, where they reference her of someone being of sable hue. They reference and liken her to Phyllis Wheatley and Benjamin Banneker, who are her peers, because she dies in 1810. There is no Frederick Douglass yet. There is no Harriet Tubman yet. And she's a member of the pre-Bethel. She's a member of the Bethel Society, because Bethel AME Church isn't Bethel AME Church yet. And so here are people who were lost and were buried in this rich history that we've been able to pull out. Other persons like that were Joseph Chaney, who was an African-American free black in the community who owned businesses. He was a landowner. He was a trustee here for the church. And he was also one of those important free persons of color that has emerged out of the land. We share information about our archaeology that comes out of the project. I had shared with people on the tour one of my favorite artifacts, if you will, which was the Liberty coin that was retrieved from the James Price House. And I think that coin just speaks so uniquely to the Hill community, and that Lady Liberty would have had a red cap and a red gown, and the red gown and the red caps would have signified free persons of color. And I just think that that coin means so much more to a place like the Hill community than it does in terms of its actual half-cent value. And we continue to work with this historic district, as I mentioned, as the district itself was listed in the 80s and expanded in 2005, but all of this rich history that we're talking about has yet to really be captured in that, and we want to see that that is becoming a part of the Hill's rich history. I want to remind people and clarify that the Hill is not the earliest community, as persons will often say that. One of the earliest free black communities was Fort Moshe. And what we know from other scholars is that Fort Moshe had free persons of color arriving as early as 1513. And so the Hill community and its importance of being the oldest is that Treme, which celebrated its bicentennial in 2012, was known as America's oldest community. And it was one of the oldest communities that was still intact in terms of having the integrity of an overall community. Much of Treme has been destroyed by natural disasters, but the Hill community's date predates the Treme community, as Treme before 1812 was a plantation. And as I mentioned, in 1790, when the first census was conducted here, there were free persons of color living here. And in 1788, there was certainly James Freeman, who was purchasing land, and others who were in the Hill community. And so we are celebrating that rich history. We are moving beyond preservation and using the rich history as a means to the revitalization of this community. We are working with various groups to breathe new life into this community, and we are trying to put the message out that this is a community and it's a place that's worth caring about. And so I'm going to borrow from a couple individuals who I've been inspired by in this work, one of which is an architect, as I am an architect, and that is Daniel Burnham, who laid out the city of Chicago. And one of his quotes that I'm often reminded of is to make no little plans, for they have no power to stare men's bloods. Make big plans and aim high in hope and in your work. And we use that and we're guided by that, or at least I am in this endeavor, because it is a huge undertaking. And then I'm going to borrow from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who says, which I think many people have been wanting to ask me, where do we go from here? And Dr. King during the 1960s couldn't have put this any better, because I've learned and I've come to find this work in community development to be a civil rights activity and a civil rights agenda. And I'm going to just share with you what Dr. Martin Luther King shared in the 1960s with where do we go from here. And I can truly say this with Dr. King. I must confess, my friends, the road ahead will not be smooth. There still will be rocky places of frustration and meandering points of bewilderment. There will be inevitable setbacks here and there. There will be those moments when the buoyancy of hope will be transformed into the fatigue of despair. Difficult and painful as it is, we must walk days ahead with an audacious faith in the future. And that last line, with an audacious faith in the future, because there is a viable future for the Hill community. We have brought more than 1,400 visitors through the Hill community in a year. We've had more than 500 visitors coming to the archaeological site. We've had approximately 1,500 people coming out to listen to the lectures. We've had more than 30 families participating in the oral history. We've had more than 20 families have their genealogical records traced. We've had more than 130 land records traced. We've had 2 historic churches who are now being restored out of the effort. There will be more than 16 neighbors who will benefit from the 8 historic houses that will be revitalized. This combined number will serve more than 3,500 people impacted by the Hill in a single year. And we're going further. The director of the Talbot County Office of Tourism is working with us on rolling out a tour guide, an official tour guide. We take all these visitors through the Hill, and there is no real tour guide. They're going to work with us on additional interpretive signage to complement what historic Easton has done at the archaeological site. And they're going to work with us on an interpretive online exhibition so that you can find out the rest of this history, because we cannot tell it all, obviously, and we're given the shortest side of this yet. So as I take my seat, I want to thank all of those that I typically would acknowledge one by one. for working with us on this very massive project. And it's been such a joy and an honor to have this project come to life here in the town of Easton and move further out across our national landscape and even beyond to international. And we are celebrating the Hill community, and we are going to walk on in the days ahead with an audacious faith in the future to preserve the hallowed grounds of this rich site of an African American memory. Thank you.